The plea was a stone in her throat, a thing with weight and sharp edges she had carried across 3 frost-hardened nights and 4 days of unrelenting sun. To reach this place, this needle of black rock that tore a hole in the sky, Elara had shed everything: her name, her scent, her fear. No, not her fear. The fear was all she had left. It was a living thing, a second heartbeat thrumming a frantic rhythm against her own. The fortress of the vampire king smelled of cold stone, of dust that had forgotten the sun, and of something else, something metallic and ancient that coated the back of her tongue like old blood. She thought of the forest she had left behind, the damp, rich scent of loam and decaying leaves, the crisp perfume of pine, the familiar musk of her own kind. Here, the air was dead. It did not move. It was a held breath, centuries long. They had left her in the throne room, 2 silent guards melting back into the shadows they seemed woven from. The chamber was a vast cavern of polished obsidian and dark-veined marble. High above, narrow windows sliced the gloom with blades of bruised twilight, illuminating motes of dust that danced like captured ghosts. The throne was not a seat of gold and velvet, but a monstrosity carved from a single piece of basalt, its lines sharp and brutal, more altar than chair. And upon it sat the king. Cation. The name was a whisper of dread among her people, a story to frighten pups, a curse spat into the fire. He was legend. He was death. He was her only hope. He did not move, not so much as the flicker of an eyelash. He watched her from the shadows of his throne, a study in absolute stillness. He was less a man than a statue carved from night and ice, his face a pale, elegant mask of aristocratic boredom. Yet his eyes, they were not bored. They were ancient, pupils like chips of jet in a sea of silver, and they saw everything. They saw the tremor in her hands, the ragged hem of her tunic, the desperate, hollowed-out terror that had carved its home beneath her ribs. For a long time, there was only the sound of her own breathing, too loud in the suffocating silence. The stone in her throat was choking her. She had rehearsed the words, practiced them on her long journey until her tongue was raw, but they scattered now like dry leaves in a gale. "You are a long way from your woods, little wolf," he said. His voice was not the thunder she had expected. It was quiet, a low, resonant sound like the scraping of silk over stone. It held no warmth, but no overt malice either. It was simply a statement of fact. Elara forced herself to lift her chin. She had come here to beg, but she would not grovel. The bruises on her soul were from her own kind, she would not let this ancient predator add to them. "I have come to seek a pact." A flicker of something interest, amusement, disturbed the placid surface of his stillness. One of his brows, a severe, black slash, rose a fraction of an inch. "Pacts are for equals. You are prey that has wandered into the heart of the den. You should be pleading for your life, not proposing treaties." "My life is already forfeit," she said, and the truth of it gave her a strange, brittle strength. The words came easier now, dredged up from the deepest well of her despair. "If you send me back, my alpha will kill me. Slowly. He will make an example of me for the sin of running." She took a breath, the dead air burning her lungs. "If you kill me now, it will be a mercy. So you see, Lord King, I have nothing left to lose. That makes us equals enough." He considered this. The silence stretched again, pulled taut between them. She could feel his gaze dissecting her, peeling back the layers of dirt and exhaustion to the raw will beneath. She stood her ground, her spine a rod of iron, even as her heart hammered against it. "You overestimate the value of desperation," he said at last. "But I am curious. What sort of pact would a runaway Omega propose to the likes of me?" This was the moment. The precipice. Elara swallowed the stone. "Protection. Sanctuary within your walls. In exchange, I will give you information. Everything I know about my alpha, Lord Vorlag. His patrols, his numbers, the weaknesses in his claim." Cation's lips curved into a smile that was all sharp edges and no warmth. It was the most terrifying thing she had ever seen. "I have spies, little wolf. They tell me all I need to know about the rabid dog who yaps at my borders. Your information is worth less than the blood in your veins. And I am not hungry." Her hope, a fragile, fluttering thing, began to die. It was a foolish, desperate gamble. Of course it was. Why would a king of an ancient and powerful race care about the plight of one broken creature? He would kill her, or worse, he would turn her out, back to the fate she had run from. The thought of Vorlag's hands, his scent, his suffocating presence, sent a wave of nausea through her. And in that moment, desperation gave way to a pure, clarifying rage. It burned through her fear, cauterizing the wound of her despair. "Then I will offer you something more," she said, her voice dropping, gaining a hard, flinty edge she didn't recognize as her own. "I will offer you a dynasty." The king's smile vanished. He leaned forward slightly, a subtle shift that was as startling as a sudden shout. His silver eyes narrowed. "Explain." "Vorlag's power is in his line. His sons, his brothers. The belief that his blood is destined to rule, to conquer. He boasts that his pack will one day grow strong enough to challenge even you, to claim these mountains for the wolf." She took a step forward, then another, her bare feet silent on the cold marble. She was closing the distance, breaking the unspoken rule of supplicant and king. "Sanctuary is not enough. Protection is not enough. I want you to destroy them. All of them. I want you to burn his line from the world, root and stem. I want you to salt the earth where his keep stands so that nothing of him, not even a memory, will ever grow there again." She stopped, a mere 10 feet from the dais. She was breathing hard, the force of her own hatred shocking her. She had given voice to the darkest prayer of her heart. The throne room was utterly silent. The twilight in the high windows had deepened to a bruised purple. Cation stared at her, his ageless face unreadable. The air crackled with a sudden, palpable tension. She had not offered him a bargain. She had offered him a war. She had offered him a wolf's vengeance, bloody and absolute, and asked him to be its instrument. She watched his long, pale fingers tap once, twice, against the basalt arm of his throne. The sound was like the slow dripping of water in a deep cave, a sound that measured out eternity. Then, he spoke, his voice a soft, dangerous whisper that slid into the marrow of her bones. "Now," he said, a slow, predatory smile returning to his lips, this time reaching the cold silver of his eyes. "Now you have my attention." The pact was made in silence, sealed not with ink or blood, but with a long, weighted look that passed between them. A king and a runaway. A predator and his prey. An ancient power and a fresh, raw wound. She had asked for vengeance, and he, for reasons she could not begin to fathom, had granted it. From Cation's perspective, the creature before him was an anomaly. He had seen millennia of her kind, short-lived, violent, ruled by instinct and appetite. They bred, they fought, they died. Their alphas postured at his borders, their packs scrabbled in the dirt for territory, and their omegas were chattel, useful for bearing pups and absorbing the pack's aggression. He had never given them more than a passing thought, a nuisance to be managed, like weather or rockfall. But this one was different. He watched her as she stood in the center of his throne room, a small, fierce thing wrapped in rags and defiance. He could smell her, of course. The scent was a complex tapestry. The sour tang of fear was the most prominent thread, but beneath it lay the sweeter notes of pine and wild herbs from her journey, the sharp, metallic scent of her exhaustion, and something else, something deeper. It was the smell of a will that had been bent but not broken, of a spirit that had been brutalized into a fine, hard point. It was, he decided, the scent of purpose. Her plea had amused him at first. Sanctuary. Information. The predictable requests of a refugee. He had been about to dismiss her, to have her escorted from his lands with a casual warning that would have been its own kind of death sentence. He had no interest in sheltering Vorlag's stray dogs. It would be an insult, a petty squabble beneath his notice. Vorlag was a brute, but a predictable one. His ambitions were tiresome, but contained. There was no advantage in upsetting the delicate, centuries-old balance for the sake of one insignificant omega. But then she had changed the terms. "I want you to burn his line from the world, root and stem." The words had landed in the silent chamber with the force of a physical blow. He had felt a flicker of something he had not experienced in a very, very long time: surprise. She wasn't begging for her own life. She was demanding the annihilation of her enemies. It was a request of breathtaking arrogance, of magnificent hatred. She was not a lamb pleading with a lion not to eat her, she was a sparrow directing an eagle where to strike. And it was not a poor strategic move. Vorlag's line was his power. His 2 brutish sons, his ambitious brother, the web of cousins and nephews who enforced his will. To remove Vorlag alone would be to invite a bloody succession war at his border, creating chaos. To remove the entire line, that was a different matter. That was a political restructuring. It was a cleansing. It would leave a power vacuum, one he could easily fill with a more pliable, less troublesome pack leader. It would secure his southern border for another century. It was an elegant solution to a persistent problem. A problem he hadn't bothered to solve himself simply because it hadn't been worth the effort. But she was making it worth the effort. He studied her face, the defiant set of her jaw, the way her eyes, the color of moss after rain, held his without flinching. There was a cost to what she asked. A war, even a small, precise one, required resources. It required his attention. And it would bind him to her. She would become his charge, his responsibility. A living symbol of his intervention. He should have refused. It was the logical, prudent thing to do. But logic had governed his existence for 1,000 years, and it had led to this, an eternity of cold stone, silent servants, and a profound, unshakable weariness. He was a creature of absolute power, and he was bored. This Omega, Elara, was not boring. She was a spark of incandescent rage in his grey, unchanging world. She was a story he did not know the ending to. And for that reason alone, he found himself wanting to turn the page. "You will stay here," he had told her, his voice leaving no room for argument. "You will be my guest. You will speak to no one of what we have agreed. My people will see to your needs. And you, in turn, will be my weapon. You will tell me everything you know. Not just patrol routes. Tell me of their fears, their rituals, their rivalries. Tell me what they love, so I know what to take from them." He had watched the play of emotions on her face: shock, disbelief, adorning, terrible triumph, and finally, the crushing weight of what she had done. He saw the precise moment the pact settled into her soul, a burden she would carry forever. It was a heavy price for survival. He knew something of heavy prices. Now, hours later, he stood on a balcony overlooking the vast, moon-silvered expanse of his domain. The mountains clawed at a sky littered with cold, indifferent stars. He could feel her presence in his castle, a faint, warm flicker in the pervasive chill. A disruption. He had given her chambers in the East Wing, far from his own, in a suite of rooms that had not been occupied in 200 years. He had ordered the kitchens to prepare her food, the servants to draw her a bath, for silks to be laid out for her to wear. These were trivialities, but they were also the first threads of the web he was weaving around her. She was his now. Her safety, and her vengeance, were his to command. A faint smile touched his lips. Lord Vorlag would be hunting for her. He would be raging, sending his brutish sons to scour the woods. He would think she was hiding in a ditch somewhere, or had been eaten by a predator. He would never, in his wildest, most arrogant dreams, imagine that she was here. That the little Omega he had broken had found a far greater predator to turn upon him. The dramatic irony was exquisite. For the first time in a century, Cation felt the stirrings of genuine anticipation. The game had begun. The chambers were a cage of impossible beauty. Elara had never seen such things, not even in her dreams. The walls were hung with tapestries depicting ancient, forgotten hunts, the colors so rich they seemed to hum in the low light. A fire crackled in a marble hearth, its warmth a living thing against her chilled skin. The bed was a mountain of down and silk, the sheets so smooth they felt like cool water against her bruised body. A bath had been drawn for her in an adjoining room, the water scented with lavender and rose, steam coiling like spirits in the air. She stood in the center of the room, dripping from the bath, wrapped in a robe of dark velvet that was softer than anything she had ever touched. She felt like a wild animal trapped in a dollhouse. Everything was wrong. The air was too still, scented with perfumes instead of earth and pine. The silence was absolute, broken only by the whisper of the fire. For her entire life, She had been surrounded by the sounds of the pack, the grunts and snores of sleep, the yipping of pups, the low murmur of conversation, the constant, oppressive thrum of Vorlag's dominance that vibrated through the very ground. The silence of this place was a physical weight. It pressed in on her, making it hard to breathe. She was safe. The thought was so alien, so foreign, that her mind could not quite grasp it. Vorlag could not reach her here. His fists, his voice, his suffocating presence, they were locked outside these stone walls. She should have felt relief, a profound, soul-deep gratitude. Instead, all she felt was a hollow, aching loneliness. She had traded one prison for another. A brutal, familiar cage for this silent, opulent one. She walked to the tall, arched window and looked out. There was no forest, no life. Only a sheer drop of black rock and, far below, a river of mist that coiled through the mountain pass. The moon was a sliver of bone, and the stars were sharp and cold. She was cut off from the world, from everything she had ever known. She had thought of the pack bond as a chain, but now, in its absence, she felt its loss as a phantom limb. There was an emptiness inside her, a space where the collective hum of her people used to be. She was utterly, terrifyingly alone. A soft knock came at the door. Ilara froze, her heart leaping into her throat. Instinct took over. She flattened herself against the wall beside the door, her muscles coiling, a low growl rumbling in her chest before she could stop it. The door opened slowly. A vampire woman stood there, her face as pale and placid as milk glass. She was tall and slender, dressed in a gown the color of shadows. She held a silver tray with a plate of roasted meat, bread, and a goblet of dark wine. She took in the scene, the empty room, the unturned bed. Ilara pressed against the wall like a cornered animal, and her impassive expression did not change. His Majesty sent nourishment, the woman said, her voice as smooth and cold as river stones. He thought you would be hungry after your journey. Ilara said nothing. She watched the woman's every move. The vampire placed the tray on a small table near the fire, her movements economical and silent. There was no wasted motion, no sound. It was deeply unsettling. "Will there be anything else?" the woman asked, her dark eyes meeting Ilara's. There was no emotion in them. Nothing. It was like looking into a deep well. Ilara shook her head, the movement small and jerky. The woman gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod and then turned, gliding from the room and closing the door behind her with a soft click. The sound of the latch settling into place was as final as a tomb ceiling. Ilara waited, her breath held, until the woman's presence had completely faded from the other side of the door. Slowly, she uncoiled. Her body was trembling. She was a creature of instinct in a world of unnatural stillness. Every nerve ending screamed at her that she was surrounded by predators, that she was deep in enemy territory. But the greatest predator of all had promised her his protection. She had to trust that. She had no other choice. She crept toward the table, her hunger a gnawing ache in her belly. The smell of the roasted meat was dizzying. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. She picked up a piece of the bread. It was still warm. She brought it to her lips, then hesitated. Was it poisoned? Was this some kind of trick? But what would be the point? If the king had wanted her dead, he could have done it with a single, swift movement in the throne room. This, all of this, the room, the bath, the food, was part of the pact. It was the price of her knowledge. The price of her vengeance. She took a bite. The bread was soft, the crust a perfect, flaky shell. Her eyes closed. The simple act of eating, of tasting something other than fear and dust, was so overwhelming that tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. She ate ravenously, like the starving animal she was, not bothering to sit, her fingers tearing at the meat and stuffing it into her mouth. She drank the wine, its dark, fruity taste a shock after a lifetime of only water. When she was finished, she felt the deep, heavy pull of exhaustion. Her body was a symphony of aches. She looked at the bed, that impossible mountain of softness. She had never slept on anything but a straw pallet, huddled with the other omegas for warmth. The idea of sleeping alone, in that vast, empty bed, was as frightening as it was enticing. But sleep she must. The king had called her his weapon. And a weapon needed to be sharp. She pulled back the silken covers, the material cool against her skin, and slid into the bed. The mattress yielded beneath her, so soft it felt like she was sinking. She lay on her back, staring up at the dark, vaulted ceiling, her body rigid with tension. She was waiting for the other boot to drop, for the trick, for the trap to spring. But there was only the silence, the soft crackle of the fire, and the slow, heavy beat of her own, lonely heart. For the first time in her life, she was safe. And she had never felt more afraid. He came to her the next evening. There was no knock this time, only the soft click of the door opening. Ilara, who had been curled in a chair by the fire, trying to read a book with letters that swam before her eyes, shot to her feet. Her heart slammed against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. Cation stood in the doorway, a tall, dark silhouette against the torchlight of the corridor. He was not dressed in the severe black of the throne room, but in a simple tunic of dark grey silk and black trousers. The change was disarming. It made him look less like a monarch and more like a man. A very old, very dangerous man. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him, plunging the room back into the intimate glow of the fire. "I trust the accommodations are to your liking," he said, his silver eyes scanning the room before they settled on her. "They are," she managed, her voice a little breathless. She clutched the heavy book to her chest like a shield. He gestured to the chair she had vacated. "Please. Sit. You look like a startled fawn, poised for flight. There is nowhere to run from here, I assure you." His words were meant to be calming, she thought, but they only served to remind her of her imprisonment. Still, she did as he asked, sinking back into the plush velvet of the chair. He did not sit, but prowled the room with a silent, fluid grace that was mesmerizing and terrifying in equal measure. He trailed his long, pale fingers over the spine of a book on a shelf, across the heavy weave of a tapestry. He was like the lord of the manor inspecting his possessions. She was, she realized, one of those possessions now. "Vorlag is searching for you," he said, his back to her as he examined a star chart on the far wall. "He has sent his sons into the lowlands. He has sent riders to the other packs, spreading the word that you are a thief. He claims you stole a precious heirloom." He turned to face her, a faint, mocking smile on his lips. "He has put a bounty on your head. He wants you returned to him. Alive." Ilara's blood ran cold. Of course. Vorlag would never admit one of his omegas had simply run. It would be a sign of weakness, an admission that he could not control his own. He had to invent a crime to justify his rage. "He wants to make an example of me," she whispered. Indeed, Cation moved to stand before the hearth, the firelight casting flickering shadows across his sculpted features. "It is a predictable, brutish response. And it will make his fall all the more satisfying." He looked at her, his gaze intense. "Tell me about his sons. Rorik and Fen. What are they like?" She hesitated. It felt like a betrayal, speaking of them here, in this place. But she had made her choice. The pact was a promise written in blood yet to be spilt. Rorik is the elder. He is his father's son in every way. Cruel, arrogant. He takes what he wants. He believes it is his right. She thought of Rorik's sneer, his heavy hands. A shiver ran through her. Fen is different. Quieter. He watches. He is not as strong as Rorik, so he is smarter. More cunning. Vorlag despises him for it. He sees his quietness as weakness. Cation nodded slowly, absorbing the information. A house divided. The arrogant brute and the resentful schemer. A classic dynamic. One that is easily exploited. He was quiet for a moment, his silver eyes fixed on the flames. And Vorlag's brother, Malachi. What is his role? He is the enforcer, Ilara said. He leads the patrols. He doles out the punishments. The pack fears him more than they fear Vorlag. Vorlag is rage, a storm that passes. Malachi is cold. He enjoys the power he has over others. He enjoys their pain. And which of them do you believe killed Vorlag's first mate, 10 winters ago? Cation asked, his voice casual, as if he were inquiring about the weather. Ilara stared at him, her heart stopping for a beat. No one spoke of that. It was a forbidden topic, a dark secret buried with the she-wolf herself. The official story was that she had been taken by a sickness. But everyone knew, everyone whispered when they thought no one could hear, that she had been murdered. How do you know about that?" she stammered. "I told you, little wolf. I have spies." He took a step closer, his presence seeming to suck the warmth from the fire. "But my spies can only report facts and rumors. They cannot tell me the texture of the fear in Vorlag's keep. They cannot tell me the scent of the secrets buried there. You can. You were there. You saw it in their eyes." He was so close now she could see the faint, almost invisible lines at the corners of his eyes, the only sign of his vast age. His scent was of cold stone and something else, something clean and sharp like winter air. It was not unpleasant. It was just empty. "It was Malachi," she said, the words barely a whisper. "Vorlag ordered it." She had defied him one too many times. She had a spirit like fire. He wanted it extinguished. Malachi was the one who did it. "I saw him coming from her chambers that night. There was blood on his hands. She had been just a pup then, hiding in the shadows, and the image was burned into her memory." Caitian's expression was unreadable, but she saw something flicker in the depths of his eyes. A kind of cold, professional appreciation. He had his target. He had his lever. He now knew the deepest, darkest crack in the foundation of Vorlag's house. He reached out, and she flinched, pressing herself back into the chair. His hand stopped, hovering in the air between them. He was not reaching for her, but for the book that had fallen into her lap. He picked it up. His fingers were long and elegant, his nails immaculate. "A History of the Elder Wars," he read the title aloud. He looked at her, a real, small smile touching his lips. It transformed his face, softening the harsh, aristocratic lines. An ambitious choice for a new reader. She felt a hot flush of shame. "I cannot, the letters are difficult." "Of course," he said, his voice softer now. He placed the book on the table beside her. "This is a human text. The language is archaic." He paused, then in a gesture that seemed to surprise even himself, he reached out again, this time his fingers brushing a stray lock of hair from her cheek. His touch was as light as a moth's wing, and shockingly cold, like marble. It sent a jolt through her that was not entirely fear. It was something else. Something she could not name. "You have given me a great deal tonight, Elara," he said, his voice returning to its formal, distant tone as he withdrew his hand. "You have honored your side of the pact. I shall now honor mine." He turned and walked to the door. "Rest. You are safe here. Nothing will harm you." He was gone as silently as he had arrived. Elara sat frozen in the chair, her cheek tingling where he had touched her. She stared at the closed door, her mind reeling. He had used her name. Not Little Wolf or Omega. Elara. He had seen her, not as a category, but as a person. And in that one, small gesture, the cold, opulent cage of her sanctuary began to feel, just a little, like a shield. The pact was not just about vengeance anymore. It was about him. And that, she realized, was a far more dangerous proposition than anything she had left behind in the woods. The night was a treacherous country, and sleep was a poor guide. Elara found herself back in the longhouse, the air thick with the smell of wet fur, stale sweat, and simmering resentment. The memory was so vivid it was not a memory at all, but a recurring nightmare she was forced to inhabit. It was the night of the first snow, 3 weeks before she had fled. The world outside was white and silent, but inside, the air was heavy with menace. Vorlag was drunk. It was a familiar state, one that sharpened the edges of his cruelty to a razor's point. He sat on his high seat, a leg of roasted deer in one hand, grease shining on his beard. His eyes, small and black and piggy, scanned the pack, looking for a target, for some small infraction upon which to unleash the sour beast that lived in his belly. His gaze fell on a young Omega, Lyra, who had accidentally spilled a flagon of ale. The silence that descended was immediate and absolute. Every wolf froze, heads bowed. Lyra was trembling, her face pale, the dark stain spreading across the rushes at her feet like a pool of blood. "Clumsy bitch," Vorlag snarled, the words slurred. He hurled the gnawed bone across the room. It struck the wall just beside Lyra's head with a sickening crack. She flinched but made no sound. To show fear was to invite more pain. It was the first rule. Ilara's heart was a cold, hard knot in her chest. She watched from her place by the hearth, trying to make herself small, invisible. Lyra was her friend. They had grown up together, sharing scraps of food and whispered hopes in the dark. "Clean it up," Vorlag commanded. "With your tongue." A collective, silent intake of breath. It was a humiliation beyond measure. Lyra stared at the floor, her body rigid. For a moment, a terrible, breathtaking moment, Ilara thought she would refuse. She saw the spark of defiance in her friend's eyes. But then Malachi, Vorlag's brother, stepped forward. He did not speak. He simply placed a heavy hand on Lyra's shoulder. The spark in her eyes died. Slowly, Lyra sank to her knees. The entire pack watched, their faces grim masks of complicity. No one moved. No one spoke. To intervene would be suicide. Ilara's nails dug into the palms of her hands, drawing blood. The shame was a physical sickness, a foul taste in her mouth. This was what they had become. A pack of cowards, watching one of their own be debased, their silence the chain that bound them all. Lyra began to lick the spilled ale from the dirty rushes. The sound was wet and pathetic in the suffocating silence. Vorlag laughed, a great, booming sound that was full of contempt. His sons, Rorik and Fen, watched from his side. Rorik was smiling, a mirror of his father's cruelty. But Fen looked away. He stared into the fire, his expression unreadable, his jaw tight. Ilara's gaze met Lyra's across the room. Lyra's eyes were full of a despair so profound it was like looking into a bottomless pit. And in that moment, something inside Ilara broke. A cord of loyalty, of pack bond, of resignation, snapped. This was not a pack. It was a disease. And Vorlag was the sickness at its heart. It wasn't just him. It was the whole rotten structure. The sons who would inherit his cruelty, the brother who enforced it, the pack that enabled it through their fear. It had to be torn out. All of it. Later that night, Ilara had found Lyra huddled in the sleeping quarters, her body racked with silent sobs. Ilara had held her, rocking her as if she were a pup. "We have to leave," Ilara had whispered, the words tasting like treason. "We can run. Find another pack. Or lie free." Lyra had pulled away, her face a mess of tears and dirt. "There is no free, Ilara. There is only this. Or death. He would hunt us down. You know he would. There is nowhere to go." "There is," Ilara had insisted, the idea taking root in her mind, a desperate, impossible seed. "There are the mountains. The vampire's lands. Vorlag fears him. He would not follow us there." Lyra had looked at her as if she were mad. "Trade one monster for another? They say the vampire king feeds on the blood of wolves. They say he keeps their skins as trophies. They are just stories," Ilara had said, with a certainty she did not feel. "Anything is better than this." But Lyra had shaken her head, her spirit utterly crushed. "It's no use. We are what we are. There is no escape." 3 weeks later, after another beating from Rorik had left her unable to walk for a day, Ilara had made her choice. She had waited for the dead of night, taken a small pouch of dried meat and a waterskin, and slipped out of the keep like a ghost. She had not looked back. She could not. To look back was to see Lyra's face, to see the faces of all the others trapped in that cycle of fear and abuse, and her resolve might have broken. She had to run, not just for herself, but for the memory of the defiance she had seen in Lyra's eyes before it had been extinguished. She would not let her own spark die. She would carry it, nurture it, and find a way to turn it into an inferno that would consume them all. Ilara woke with a gasp, the feel of the silk sheets a shocking contrast to the filth of the longhouse floor in her dream. Her face was wet with tears. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, and the room was cold. The memory of Lyra's brokenness was a fresh wound. This was why. This was why she had asked for more than just her own safety. It was for Lyra. It was for the she-wolf Malachi had murdered. It was for every member of the pack who had been forced to kneel, to bow, to break. Her pact with Cation was not an act of personal vengeance. It was an act of justice. A terrible, bloody, necessary justice. And she would see it through, no matter the cost to her own soul. From his solar, a circular room at the apex of the fortress's central spire, Caitian surveyed his kingdom. Below him, the world was a map of shadows and moonlight. He could see the dark, brooding expanse of the Whisperwood, the silver ribbon of the Serpent River, and the faint, smoldering orange glow of the watchfires along his southern border, Vorlag's territory. He had stood in this room for centuries, watching empires rise and fall, watching the slow, inexorable grind of time. The affairs of the wolf pack were, in the grand scheme of things, a triviality. Yet, they now occupied his thoughts with an uncharacteristic intensity. A report lay on the polished obsidian desk before him. It was from one of his agents, a wraith-like creature that could move unseen through the deepest shadows. The report detailed Vorlag's increasing rage and paranoia. The Alpha had doubled his patrols. He had publicly flogged 2 guards for failing to notice Ilara's escape. He was drinking heavily, his temper more volatile than ever. His sons were at each other's throats, Rorik blaming Fen for his lax watch, Fen sneering at Rorik's oafish attempts to track the Omega. The pack was on edge, a powder keg waiting for a spark. Ilara's information had been the key. She had not just given him names and locations, she had given him the emotional architecture of the pack. She had told him of Fen's resentment, of Malachai's ambition, of the old guard's quiet disapproval of Vorlag's reckless brutality. She had handed him a web of fractures and fault lines, and he was a master at applying pressure. He had already sent his first message. Not to Vorlag, but to another Alpha, a rival pack leader named Kale who ruled the lands to the east of Vorlag's. The message was simple, carried by a bat with a sliver of parchment tied to its leg. It contained a single piece of information, a secret Ilara had shared. Vorlag had been cheating Kale for years, secretly trading pelts with human trappers, a practice forbidden by the oldest laws between the packs. It was a small betrayal, but a deeply insulting one. It was a spark tossed into the dry tinder of Kale's pride. Now, all Caitian had to do was wait and watch it catch fire. Vorlag, consumed with finding his lost Omega, would now have to contend with a threat on his other flank. His resources would be divided, his attention split. It was a cold, calculated move, the kind he had made 1,000 times before. But this time, it felt different. His motivations were muddled. He told himself this was about political stability, about removing a nuisance. But when he was honest with himself, in the deep silence of his ancient mind, he knew it was about her. It was about the look in her moss-green eyes when she spoke of their cruelty. It was about the faint tremor in her hands that she tried so hard to hide. A strange, unfamiliar emotion had taken root in the barren soil of his chest. Protectiveness. It was a fierce, proprietary feeling, and it disturbed him. He had found himself observing her. He was a creature of shadow and silence, it was easy to watch her unseen. He had seen her in the library, her brow furrowed in concentration as she tried to decipher the books, her fingers tracing the strange, alien words. He had seen her in the small, walled garden, her face turned up to the weak sun that managed to penetrate the high mountain peaks, a look of profound, aching nostalgia on her face. She moved through his cold, static world like a drop of warm blood on snow. A vibrant, living thing. He was beginning to understand the price of this pact. It wasn't the deployment of his agents or the political capital he was expending. The price was this entanglement. This intrusion of a warm, mortal, complicated life into his cold, orderly eternity. She was a disruption to his carefully curated solitude. He had sought a momentary diversion from his ennui, and he had instead found a complication that resonated on a frequency he had long forgotten. His second-in-command, a stoic, silent vampire named Lucian, entered the solar. He moved without a sound, his presence a subtle shift in the room's atmosphere. He bowed his head. "My lord. Your orders have been carried out." The message was delivered to Alpha Kale. "And?" Caitian asked, not turning from the window. "Our agent reports that Kale was displeased. He has recalled his hunting parties and is strengthening his border with Vorlag." "Excellent," Caitian murmured. "Let the dogs snarl at each other for a while. It will soften them up. Lucian was silent for a moment, a rare sign of his unease. "My lord, if I may, is this wise? To involve ourselves so directly in the affairs of the werewolves? They are chaotic, unpredictable." Cation finally turned to face his old subordinate. Lucian's face was a mask of respectful concern, but Cation could see the question in his eyes. "Why are you doing this for her?" "Wisdom is a luxury of those with nothing at stake, Lucian," Cation said, his voice soft. "I have been idle for too long. A king who does not exercise his power finds that it atrophies." He walked to his desk and picked up the spy's report, though he was no longer seeing the words. He was seeing a pair of moss-green eyes, blazing with a hatred so pure it was almost beautiful. "Besides," he added, a faint, cold smile touching his lips, "I have made a promise. And the foundation of any kingdom, however old, is the belief that its king's word is absolute." Lucian bowed again, accepting the answer, though Cation knew he did not understand it. He did not understand it himself. He had made a pact with a runaway Omega, a promise to destroy her enemies. And in doing so, he had bound his own fate to hers, tying the cold, dead threads of his existence to her short, vibrant, and ferocious life. It was, he thought with a strange sense of inevitability, the most reckless and compelling thing he had done in 500 years. A week passed. It was a strange, suspended time for Ilara. She fell into a quiet routine, a rhythm dictated by the silent efficiency of the castle. Meals appeared outside her door. The fire was always lit, the room always clean. She spent her days in the vast, silent library, surrounded by the smell of old paper and leather. She was slowly, painstakingly, teaching herself to read, her progress measured in single words deciphered, then phrases, then whole sentences. The books told stories of a world she had never known, of kings and queens, of magic and monsters far stranger than the ones she had fled. They were a window out of her prison, a way to travel while staying perfectly still. She did not see Cation again, but she felt his presence everywhere. It was in the quality of the food she was given, the softness of the clothes laid out for her, the unending supply of candles for her reading. He was an invisible, omniscient force, a god of this small, stone universe. She knew he was watching her. Sometimes, she would feel a prickling on the back of her neck, a sense that she was not alone, but when she turned, there was only shadow. It should have been terrifying, but strangely, it wasn't. It was comforting. It was the silent affirmation of his protection. One afternoon, she found him in the observatory. She had wandered, for the first time, beyond the library and her chambers, her curiosity finally outweighing her fear. She had followed a winding stone staircase upward, toward a slit of light, and found herself in a circular room at the top of a tower. The ceiling was a great dome of glass, and the room was filled with strange brass instruments, telescopes and astrolabes and orreries that charted the silent, celestial dance. Cation stood before the glass dome, looking not up at the sky, but down at the world below. He did not seem surprised to see her. "The wolves call this peak the Sky Spear," he said, his voice quiet. "My people call it the Axis. A still point in a turning world." Ilara walked slowly to his side, her gaze following his. From this height, the mountains and forests were just textures on a map. It was a perspective of immense power, one that made everything seem small and insignificant. "You can see everything from here," she whispered, awed. "I can see a great deal," he corrected gently. "But not everything. I see the movements of armies, the changing of seasons, the slow crawl of glacier. I do not see the look in a pup's eye, or the way a flower opens to the morning sun. My perspective is vast, but it is also thin." He turned his silver gaze to her. "You, on the other hand. Your world was very small. But you saw it with great detail, did you not?" She thought of the forest, of the specific scent of a crushed fern, the pattern of frost on a winter leaf, the subtle shift in the Pact's mood that she could read in the twitch of an ear. "Yes," she said. "I did." "Tell me something you saw," he said. "Something small." It was a strange request. She hesitated, then spoke of the one beautiful thing she held in her memory from Vorlag's keep. There was a single moon-petal blossom that grew in a crack in the courtyard wall. It only bloomed on the night of the full moon, for a few hours. The petals were like silver silk. It had a scent, like sweet night air. Everyone else ignored it. They saw it as a weed. But I would watch it. It was a small, perfect thing in a very ugly place. Cation was quiet for a long time, his expression thoughtful. A moon petal, he murmured. They are very rare. They require a precise balance of shade, moisture, and reflected moonlight. A miracle of resilience. He looked at her, and she felt as if he were seeing not just her, but the small, stubborn flower she had just described. Thank you for telling me that. The sincerity in his voice surprised her. A tentative sort of courage bloomed in her chest. May I ask you a question? He inclined his head. Why, she asked, the single word encompassing everything. Why are you doing this? Helping me. It's a war. 4-1 Omega. He turned back to the window, his profile a stark, pale silhouette against the darkening sky. Perhaps I was bored, he said, his tone light, but his eyes were serious. Perhaps your alpha was an irritation I was inclined to remove. Perhaps I saw a strategic advantage. He paused. Or perhaps, after 1,000 years of watching the world, you grow tired of seeing the same story repeat itself. The strong preying on the weak. The cruel dominating the timid. You begin to wonder what would happen if you were to change one of the variables. To give the prey teeth. He looked at her again, and the distance between them seemed to shrink, the air growing thick with unspoken things. You are not a weed, Ilara. You are a moon petal. And you have taken root in the last place anyone would have thought to look. His words settled deep inside her, a balm on a wound she hadn't known was still bleeding. He saw her. He understood. In this cold, ancient predator, she had found a strange and unexpected kinship. The fear she had carried for so long was still there, a low hum beneath the surface, but it was now joined by something else. A fragile, tentative flicker of trust. She had come to him as a supplicant, a weapon to be used. But in this high, silent tower, with the world spread out beneath them, she felt, for the first time, like something more. She felt like his ally. The first blow fell not with the clash of steel or the snapping of jaws, but with the quiet poison of a well-placed word. Cation's message to Alpha Kale had done its work. The news of Vorlag's treachery, trading with humans, spread like a contagion through the territories. It was the gravest of insults, a stain on a leader's honor. Pacts that had been neutral now viewed Vorlag with suspicion. Alliances that had been solid for generations began to fray. The news reached the fortress via a haggard-looking scout from a friendly border clan. He spoke to Lucian in the lower courtyard, his voice a low, urgent murmur. From her window high above, Ilara could not hear the words, but she could read the story in the scout's tense posture and Lucian's grim stillness. The world outside her sanctuary was beginning to shift. The pieces on the board were in motion. Later that day, Lucian brought her the news himself. He found her in the library, a heavy tome open on her lap. His presence was always unsettling, a pocket of cold in the warm, firelit room. Alpha Kale has challenged Vorlag's claim to the Sunken Valley hunting grounds, he stated, without preamble. His voice was flat, betraying no emotion. He has declared Vorlag a trucebreaker and an oathbreaker. They are massing warriors on their shared border. Ilara's heart gave a hard, painful thud. The Sunken Valley. It was the richest hunting ground for 3 territories, the prize that kept Vorlag's pack fed through the harsh winters. To lose it would be a devastating blow. It was a strike at the very heart of his ability to provide, the foundation of any alpha's rule. So it has begun, she whispered, her hands tightening on the book. She felt a strange, dizzying mix of emotions. There was a fierce, triumphant satisfaction. This was what she had wanted, the beginning of the end for the man who had tormented her. But beneath it, there was a cold knot of dread. She knew the wolves who would be sent to defend that valley. Young males, full of bravado and fear. Pups she had watched grow. They would bleed and die because of a word sent by her protector. His Majesty's strategy is proving effective, Lucian continued, his dark eyes watching her, gauging her reaction. Vorlag is now caught between 2 threats, Kale's challenge to the east, and his own obsessive hunt for you in the west. His forces are divided. His focus is fractured. And the pack? She asked, her voice barely audible. What are they saying? A flicker of something, was it contempt, crossed Lucian's pale features. They are wolves. They follow the strongest. Some are grumbling. They say Vorlag's pride has brought this trouble upon them. They say he is weakened by his obsession with a single runaway omega. The words were a slap. A single runaway omega. That was all she was to them. All she would ever be. Not a person, not Elara, but a piece of property whose absence had caused an inconvenience. The realization hardened her resolve. She was not doing this to them. They had done this to themselves, with their silence, their complicity, their refusal to stand against the monster who led them. "Thank you for telling me," she said, her voice steady now. She met Lucian's gaze, letting him see the cold fire in her own. Let him think her a monster. She had made a pact with one, after all. What did it matter if she became one herself? After Lucian left, she sat for a long time, staring into the fire. The pact was no longer an abstract desire. It was real. It had teeth. It was drawing blood miles away, blood of wolves she had once called her own. She thought of Fen, Vorlag's quiet, cunning son. He would be the one to see the trap. He would understand that this was not a simple border dispute, that there was a larger hand at play. He would be the most dangerous opponent. A wave of guilt, sharp and sickening, washed over her. Was this justice, or was it just a grander, more terrible form of cruelty? Was she any better than Vorlag, using a greater power to destroy those who were weaker? The thought was a serpent, coiling in her gut. She had wanted to burn the rot out, but fire was indiscriminate. It consumed everything, the healthy would along with the diseased. She stood up and began to pace the library, the long shelves of silent, sleeping books seeming to watch her. She was a weapon, Cation had said. But a weapon doesn't feel. It doesn't ache with guilt or fear. She felt everything. Every imagined death, every drop of blood spilt in her name, was a fresh weight on her soul. She had to see him. She found him not in the observatory or the throne room, but in the armory. The room was cold and smelled of oil and whetstone and old, cold steel. Racks of swords and pikes stood like silent soldiers in the gloom. Suits of black, gleaming plate armor were mounted on stands, their empty helms like watching skulls. Cation stood before a grinding wheel, a long, elegant sword held in his hands. Sparks flew as he sharpened the blade, the screech of metal on stone the only sound. He looked up as she entered, his silver eyes catching the light from the forge. He showed no surprise. He simply stopped his work, the wheel spinning down into silence. "It has begun," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Lucian told me." "Yes," he said. He laid the sword down on a workbench and picked up a soft leather cloth, wiping the blade with slow, deliberate strokes. "The first stone has been dislodged. Now we watch the avalanche. They will die," she said, the words raw. "Wolves who have done nothing, who only follow their alpha as they are bound to do." "Many will die," he agreed, his voice calm, matter-of-fact. "That is the nature of war. It is the nature of the change you asked for. Did you think a dynasty could be unmade with harsh words and hurt feelings? I didn't. I didn't think about what it would feel like," she confessed, her voice breaking. "To be the cause of it. To know that they are dying because of me." The serpent of guilt was choking her now. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and shameful. She had tried to be hard, to be cold, but she was failing. She was just a terrified girl, caught in the gears of a machine she had set in motion. She finally broke. A sob escaped her, ragged and ugly. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. She had been so strong for so long, but the reality of her pact, of the blood on her hands, was too much to bear. She stood there, in the heart of his cold, military power, and wept. She expected him to be disgusted. She expected contempt, or cold dismissal. Instead, she felt him move closer. She felt the air around her chill slightly. Then, a hand, cool and firm, settled on her shoulder. She flinched, but the hand did not retreat. It simply rested there, a point of solid, steady contact in her swirling chaos. "Look at me, Elara," he said, his voice quiet, but with an edge of command that cut through her grief. Slowly, she lowered her hands. Her face was a wreck, her eyes red and swollen. He stood before her, his expression not of pity, but of a deep, solemn understanding. "There is no justice without a price," he said. "And the price is always paid in blood and grief. Yours. Theirs. Do not dishonor their deaths by indulging in a guilt they would have never shown you. They would have watched Vorlag tear you to pieces and called it the Alpha's right. They chose their side long before you ever came to me." He reached up with his other hand and, with his thumb, gently wiped a tear from her cheek. The gesture was so unexpected, so intimate, it stole her breath. His touch was cold, but it was not unkind. "You feel this pain because you are not like them," he continued, his silver eyes holding hers. "You have a conscience. That is your strength, not your weakness. It is why you ran. It is why you are here. The grief you feel is proof that you are fighting for the right reasons." He paused, his gaze searching her face. "I have lived for a very long time. I have seen civilizations turn to dust. I have learned that the cycles of violence, of cruelty and oppression, do not end on their own. They must be broken. And breaking things is never a clean or quiet process." His words were not a comfort in the way a warm hug would be. They were something harder, something more real. They were a foundation of grim truth she could stand on. He was not telling her not to grieve. He was telling her that her grief was meaningful, that it was the cost of creating something better. I am afraid," she whispered, confessing the deepest truth of all. Not just of Vorlag, but of this. Of herself. Of what she was becoming. "So you should be," he said, his hand still on her shoulder, a strange, cold anchor. "Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to act in spite of it." He let his hand fall away, and the loss of contact left her feeling strangely bereft. "You have made your decision, Elara. You have chosen to break the cycle. I am merely the instrument of that choice. The sword is in your hand. Do not let it tremble now." He turned back to the workbench and picked up the newly sharpened blade. He held it up, its polished surface reflecting her own tear-streaked face. For a long moment, they both looked at her reflection in the steel, a frightened Omega, a vengeful queen, a girl and a monster all at once. The pact was fulfilled in blood, and her absolution would not be found in tears, but in the new world she was fighting to create. She took a deep, shuddering breath, and when she looked up to meet his gaze, her eyes were clear. The war for the sunken valley was short and brutal. Vorlag, arrogant and overconfident, sent his son Rorik with a force he believed was overwhelming. He underestimated Kale's fury and desperation. Kale's warriors, fighting for their honor and their winter survival, fought with a ferocity that stunned Vorlag's pack. Rorik, a bully but not a strategist, was outmaneuvered and his forces were routed. He retreated with heavy losses, his tail between his legs. The news of the defeat sent shockwaves through Vorlag's territory. It was more than a lost battle, it was a public humiliation. For the first time, the pack saw their invincible alpha beaten. The whispers started, quiet at first, then growing louder. Vorlag's grip, held for so long through fear, was beginning to slip. In his rage, he did the worst possible thing. He turned his fury inward, on his own pack. Public beatings became more frequent. Rations were cut for the families of the warriors who had fallen. The fear in the keep began to curdle into a sullen, simmering resentment. In his fortress, Kashan received these reports with a cold, quiet satisfaction. Everything was proceeding as he had foreseen. The second phase of his plan was now ready. He had located Malachi's secret. Elara had told him that Vorlag's brother had a weakness, a human woman in a village on the far side of the mountains. A lover he had kept hidden for years. It was a shocking transgression, a hypocrisy of the highest order for the Pact's brutal enforcer of tradition. Kashan sent one of his most trusted agents, not to harm the woman, but to deliver a message to Malachi. The message was a simple drawing, a wolf and a human woman, standing together beneath a blood-red moon. And on the back, a single word, soon. It was an anonymous, untraceable threat, designed to ignite Malachi's paranoia. He would not know who sent it. He would suspect Kale. He might even suspect his own brother, Vorlag, of discovering his secret and planning to use it against him. The seeds of distrust, so carefully planted, were beginning to sprout. The final piece was Fen, the quiet, watchful son. Ilara had described him as cunning, resentful of his father and brother. He was the wild card. He would be the one to see the pattern, to suspect an outside influence. Cation decided to approach him directly, not with a threat, but with an offer. He sent an agent with a proposition, a vision of a new pack, a pack free from Vorlag's madness, a pack led by a smart, strategic alpha. A pack that could live in peace with its neighbors, including the ancient power in the mountains. The offer was a chance for Fen to seize the destiny his father had always denied him. The fortress had become Ilara's world. The initial terror had faded, replaced by a strange, quiet sense of belonging. She no longer felt like a prisoner, but like the chatelaine of a silent, stone kingdom. She knew its passages, its rhythms. She knew the way the light fell in the library in the morning, and the way the wind sang through the crenellations of the high towers at night. Her relationship with Cation had settled into its own unique rhythm as well. They would spend hours in the observatory, he, pointing out constellations and speaking of the slow, cosmic time of the stars, and she, telling him of the forest, of the secret lives of the plants and animals he could only see from a distance. They were two impossibly different beings, from two impossibly different worlds, finding a strange, common ground. She learned to read the subtle shifts in his stillness, the minute changes in his silver eyes. She saw the profound loneliness that clung to him like a shroud, the weariness of an existence that had no end. And he, in turn, seemed to draw something from her, a warmth, a vitality that his cold world lacked. He never touched her again after that day in the armory, but the space between them was charged with a palpable energy, a connection that needed no physical contact to be felt. One evening, he came to her chambers. She was reading by the fire, and looked up as he entered. There was a gravity in his expression that she had not seen before. "It is time," he said. Her heart began to beat faster. "What is time?" "Vorlag is summoning his entire line. His sons, his brother, his cousins. He is calling a council of blood to plan a final, desperate assault on Kale." Cation's voice was low, resonant with deadly purpose. "They will all be in the longhouse tonight. Under one roof." Ilara stood up, the book falling unheeded to the floor. This was it. The moment her vengeance, and her pact, would be fulfilled. "My agents are in place," Cation continued, his gaze locked with hers. "Malachi is paranoid, believing Vorlag means to expose him. Fen has been given his offer. The pack is resentful and afraid. The house is rotten to its foundations. It needs only one final push to collapse." He took a step closer. "But the choice, Ilara, is still yours. I have brought them to the precipice. You must be the one to give the order to push." He was giving her the power. The final, terrible responsibility. She looked into his ancient, silver eyes and saw the reflection of her own choice. She thought of Lyra, her face streaked with tears as she licked ale from the filthy floor. She thought of the murdered she-wolf, her fiery spirit extinguished by a brother's hand. She thought of a small, silver flower, a moon petal, struggling to grow in a place of utter ugliness. Her resolve hardened, not into the cold steel of vengeance, but into the unyielding stone of necessity. This was not about hatred anymore. It was about cleansing. It was about creating a space where something new, something better, could finally grow. "Do it," she said, her voice clear and strong, without a trace of a tremor. "End it. End them all." Cation nodded slowly, a look of solemn respect in his eyes. He had offered her a sword, and she had taken it. He turned and left without another word. Ilara walked to the window and looked out into the night. She could not see the lands of her birth, but she imagined she could feel the shift, the great, tectonic crack as an old, corrupt world was brought crashing down. She had made her choice. She had paid the price. And now, a new and uncertain dawn was waiting. The end came not in a storm of fire and glorious battle, but in a series of quiet, brutal moments in the dark. In Vorlag's longhouse, the air was thick with smoke and acrimony. The Alpha raged, his face purple, accusing his sons and brother of incompetence and betrayal. Malachi, his nerves frayed by Cation's anonymous threat, saw an accusation in every word. Rorik, humiliated and angry, snarled back at his father. Only Fen was silent, his eyes cold and watchful, weighing his options. The first to strike was not one of Caitian's agents, but Fen himself. As Vorlag turned to backhand Rorik for an insolent comment, Fen moved. He drew a long, sharp skinning knife from his boot and drove it into his father's side, just under the ribs. The motion was swift, economical, and utterly shocking. Vorlag gasped, his eyes wide with disbelief, and staggered back, his hand coming away from his side slick with blood. That was the signal. Caitian's wraiths, hidden in the rafters, descended. They were silent, grey shapes, moving with unnatural speed. Before the other wolves could even react, the wraiths were on them, their blades slitting throats, their movements a blur of deadly efficiency. Malachi, reaching for his own weapon, was cut down from behind. Rorik roared and charged, only to be met by 3 of the silent killers who overwhelmed him in a flurry of black steel. It was a slaughter, not a fight. A precise, surgical extermination. Within minutes, the great hall was silent, save for the crackling of the fire and the dying gurgle of Lord Vorlag. Fen stood alone amidst the carnage, his bloody knife in his hand, his face a mask of shock and grim triumph. One of the wraiths approached him, wiped its blade clean, and offered him a small, rolled parchment sealed with black wax. Fen took it. He knew what it was. It was his crown. His ascension, bought and paid for by a power he could not comprehend. The cycle was broken. A new one had begun. The news reached Ilara at dawn. Caitian came to her himself. He found her in the observatory, where she had kept a lonely vigil all night, watching the stars wheel across the sky. "It is done," he said, his voice soft in the quiet room. "Vorlag and his line are no more. Fen has taken control of the pack. He has already sent a message, suing for peace with Kale and pledging fealty to me. The war is over." Ilara closed her eyes. She did not feel the fierce triumph she had expected. She did not feel the satisfying burn of vengeance. She felt quiet. A deep, profound stillness had settled over her soul. The great, heavy stone of her past, the one she had carried for so long, had finally been lifted. In its place was a vast, empty space. "Thank you," she whispered, the words feeling small, inadequate for the enormity of what he had done for her. He came to stand beside her at the great glass dome. The first light of morning was spilling over the eastern peaks, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. It was the dawn of a new day, a new era. "The pact is fulfilled," he said. He looked at her, his silver eyes seeming to hold the new light. "You are free, Ilara. You can return to your people, if you wish. Fen would welcome you. You would be honored, hailed as a savior." She thought of the forest, of the pack. She thought of Lyra. She could go back. She could help Fen build a better world from the ashes of the old one. But the thought of it felt wrong. That world was a part of her past. A life she had shed, a skin she had outgrown. Her place was no longer there. "And what if I don't wish to return?" she asked, her voice steady as she met his gaze. A slow smile touched Caitian's lips. It was a real smile this time, one that reached his ancient eyes and filled them with a light she had never seen before. "The pact for your protection is fulfilled," he said. "But I find myself reluctant to let it end. This fortress is large, and my existence has been quiet for far too long." He reached out and took her hand. His skin was cool, but his grip was firm, grounding. It was not the touch of a king to a subject, or a protector to his charge. It was the touch of an equal. A partner. "Stay," he said, the single word a question, a plea, and a promise all in one. "Stay and help me watch the dawn." Ilara looked from his hand, holding hers, to his face, so close to her own. She saw not a monster from the old stories, but a lonely king who had changed the world for her. And she knew, with a certainty that resonated deep in her bones, that she was home. Her vengeance was complete, but her life, her real life, was just beginning. She intertwined her fingers with his. "I will," she said. Together, they stood in silence, hand in hand, watching the sun rise over a world they had remade. The old cycle of violence and fear was broken. And in its place, in the high, silent fortress at the top of the world, a new and infinitely more hopeful story was about to begin. The story of a wolf and a king, of a moon petal that bloomed in the shadows, and of a pact of vengeance that had, against all odds, become a pact of love.